Welcome to the EALTA webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Hello from the UK, from Europe, afternoon in Europe. So this is the EALTA webinar, and if you don't know about EALTA, it's the European Association for Language Testing and Assessment. It's an independent organisation promoting knowledge of language assessment and good practice in language assessment in Europe and beyond Europe as well. So if by any chance you are not a member, then you can check the website and become a member. It's free, or even if you are outside Europe, you can become an associate member. I would highly recommend it. And this is part of a series of free webinars that we do on topics of interest to the language assessment community. And we've had a very wide variety of topics so far. And also a very interesting one that we have today, which is today's topic is using AI for test item generation. So what we'll do, so Olena is going to speak for about 40 minutes or so. And that will leave us about 10 to 15 minutes of questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A section. You can use the chat just to comment on various things or introduce yourself. But please use the Q&A for questions to Olena, and I will put as many of those questions as we have time for to Olena at the end. I think at the moment we all have, apart from myself and Olena, we have cameras and microphones turned off. But if necessary, we can activate those at the end. And just to say that we are recording the webinar today, and we hope to put that up on the EALTA website as a freely available resource later. So our speaker today is Olena Rossi. Olena has a PhD in language testing from Lancaster University in the UK, and her PhD thesis was on the nature of item writing skills and their development. So her main research interests are in the areas of item writing, test development, and assessment literacy for stakeholders. Olena has also had extensive practical experience herself as an item writer and an item quality reviewer, and also as an item writer trainer. Currently, she works as an independent language assessment consultant, a researcher and practitioner. So Olena's talk today is called Using AI for Test Item Generation, Opportunities and Challenges. Thank you very much for joining us today, Olena, and over to you.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you everyone for joining today. I can see well over 200 people, which makes it a bit intimidating. But at the same time, I'm very happy that this is the topic that I feel very interested in and very passionate about, and that there are so many people that are also interested in this topic. I hope that you will hear something that makes it clearer for you, or that I will raise the questions that you haven't thought about before. Using technology for language testing is not new. In the recent years, however, partly due to COVID and partly due to the advances in technology overall, we've seen a rapid expansion of technology-mediated language assessment. What followed was an exponentially growing demand for test items. We all know that producing items by human item writers is time-consuming and also expensive. Moreover, good item writers are few and far between. At the same time, we are now witnessing rapid advancements in AI technology, including AI's incredible ability to generate human-like text. Naturally, this opportunity was not lost on the language testing community, and we are currently witnessing the rise in using AI for generating language test items. I'll start this presentation by comparing traditional automated item generation with the novel approach of generating items using AI. I'll then talk about large language models such as GPT, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, what they are, how they work, and what opportunities and challenges they bring. I'll continue to share my personal attempts at using ChatGPT and Bing Chat to generate various types of texts and test items. I'll also touch upon some recent research in this area. I'll then move on to discussing how GPT can be used for large-scale test generation using the example of the Duolingo English test. I'll end this presentation by raising some questions and musing on what the future of item writing with AI might look like. Using AI for test item generation falls under the umbrella of automated item generation, and many call it AIG, automated item generation. Automated item generation has been around for a while, at least 20 years, and in essence, it consists of 3 steps. Step 1, item writers develop an item model, which is also referred to as a template or prototype. Step 2, experts work to identify parts of this model that can be manipulated to create multiple new items. And step 3, computer algorithms generate new items based on the model by manipulating the item components. Automated item generation has been mostly used in science testing, for example, in math, because science items lend themselves better to manipulation. In language testing, it hasn't been used as much, but it still has been used. And one example is ETS, who reported using features of automated item generation to produce TOEIC listening items. And although this method allows to produce many more items than the traditional human item writing, there are several obvious disadvantages. Firstly, it relies on item models produced by humans, while producing these prototypes and then defining how they are to be manipulated is very labor-intensive. And secondly, the resulting items are basically just clones of the prototype, testing very narrowly defined constructs. Producing items with AI is very different. At the heart of it is natural language processing, which enables computers to understand human language and to interact in a way similar to how humans do. By the way, this explanation was written for me by ChatGPT. Large language models can be built, such as BERT and GPT. These models were trained on huge data sets of human language, allowing them to learn patterns, structures, and semantics inherent in the text. We all found out about GPT, or most of us, in November last year, when ChatGPT became available to general public, and it created a lot of hype. It's based on a GPT 3.5 version. There are several 3.5 versions. A new version called ChatGPT Plus also appeared very recently. It's based on the newest GPT-4, and it can be accessed with a $20 monthly subscription. So the latest GPT version is GPT-4. It was released on the 14th of March this year by OpenAI, and reportedly it was trained on a much bigger data set and has a larger number of parameters. Because of this, it solves complex problems with greater accuracy. It is better at understanding nuances of language, including the meaning, tone, and context. It can generate longer texts and texts of higher quality, and it can also better remember the context of a conversation for longer. This text was provided to me, or this information was provided to me by Bing Chat. Bing Chat is freely available as part of the Microsoft Edge browser. I use Bing Chat and not ChatGPT to ask for this information because Bing Chat has one advantage. It doesn't have a knowledge cutoff that ChatGPT has. ChatGPT doesn't know anything about the world after September 2021. Another Bing Chat advantage is that it provides links to web pages if the reader wants to learn more about the issue. GPT, large language models, are trained on a massive data set of human text. And each new version of GPT is trained on a larger data set. They use natural language processing techniques to understand and generate language. And they learn language like a child does, by being subjected to language input, by analyzing that input, and then by trying to mimic it. I would like to emphasize they mimic it, not plagiarize it. GPT produces fully original texts, and it does so by predicting each next word or token in a sequence. It doesn't do it by taking a sentence from here and a sentence from there. These were the fears that were expressed in earlier conversations about ChatGPT. Every time I've checked GPT produced text for similarity with online sources, the similarity was always 0%. GPT can produce text of any genre on any topic in a matter of seconds. It can also be asked to produce items to go with the text. And that's one way we can use it for language test item generation. I'll talk about this a bit later. GPT-generated texts are written in correct English, and they are largely indistinguishable from texts produced by humans. For example, No More Marking project, if you've heard about it, they use the comparative judgment method for large-scale marking. It fed 8 essays produced by ChatGPT based on the same prompts as students were given into the essay batch for marking. Markers were not able to tell that the essays were not written by real human students. Moreover, the scores on ChatGPT-generated essays were in the top 7%. This incredible ability by GPT to produce text on demand has recently caused a panic among educators, but this is not what I'd like to discuss today. Like any technology, GPT comes with both opportunities and challenges. Among its opportunities is that GPT can generate text of any genre on any topic in seconds. Latest GPT models can also produce required text with very little or no demonstration. This is called zero-shot learning. Zero-shot learning means that no demonstration, only a prompt, or it's also called a query, is given to the model. This is different from one-shot or few-shot learning, where one or few examples are offered to the model to learn before it produces text. The generated text is very accurate and natural sounding. Furthermore, instead of just querying ChatGPT or Bing Chat, we can use a more sophisticated way based on the same GPT model. We can use platforms such as OpenAI API, which stands for Application Programming Interface, to fine-tune the request and to produce better quality output. I'll talk about API a bit later. At the same time, there are undeniable challenges. One big challenge is that GPT comes up with fakes that it passes for facts. AI specialists call it hallucinations. Hallucinations happen because GPT models do not have the ability to understand the veracity of training data. Moreover, GPT models prioritize generating text that is creative over ensuring the factual correctness of the content. In my experience, ChatGPT generated false statistics, and it also came up with facts that were only partially true. For example, once it quoted research done by a certain university. The research indeed existed when I checked, but it was done by a different university. My experience agrees with what was found by Bezirhan von Davier, Matthias von Davier, who used GPT-3 to generate reading passages for a reading achievement test. They found that GPT was prone to generating erroneous outputs, especially for certain statistics and numbers. Another problem is that GPT is biased in various ways. For example, it represents genders in a biased way. Recent studies found the stories produced by GPT-3 consistently portrayed male characters as having better qualities, while females were weaker and less powerful. GPT-written stories where the main character was a male tended to be about war, crime, politics, and sports, while female characters were associated with family and emotions. GPT is also racially biased. For example, in a study of pain management, it was found that GPT-3 showed a 3.6% higher likelihood of refusing a pain treatment if the patient was Black. GPT-3 is also biased on the grounds of religion. A study conducted by Abid and colleagues found that using the word Muslim in the prompt given to GPT-3 had a much higher chance of generating violent output and was highly related to the word terrorist. Lastly, GPT produces original output. However, it is writing on top of its training corpus. So who should get credit for the resultant text? Is it the person who's queried the model to produce the text, like myself? Is it OpenAI, who owns GPT? Or is it the writers who produce the text for the training data? Currently, no regulations around this exist. After this brief introduction to GPT, let's return to the topic of test item generation. As different from automated item generation I talked about earlier, if you want to produce test items with GPT, no prototypes or templates to be manipulated with are necessary. In fact, you can just type into the chat box, write a text and 3 multiple choice questions, and GPT writes them in front of your eyes. It's a very futuristic experience, but how well does GPT do it? And what can it and can't do? In the next couple of slides, I'll describe and analyze my experimentations using ChatGPT and Bing Chat to write various language test items. I've started with a very simple multiple choice grammar item. Write a multiple choice item at A1 CFR level to test present continuous tense in English. You can see the resulting item. Obviously, it is unusable. So let's train GPT further. I asked it to try again, and I explained to it that the stem should be an incomplete sentence that uses present continuous tense, and that the options should be the words to fill the gap in the sentence. You can see that it understood the instructions. However, if you look at the item, it's also obvious that the gap can be filled with all 4 options, depending on the context, because there is no context in the stem. Let's try again. This time I told ChatGPT that each option can be correct for the sentence it generated, and asked it to provide more context in the sentence to make only one option correct. You can see that it listened to me and produced an item with context. It looks okay. Great. So have I trained it enough to keep producing items of this type? Now I asked it to produce a similar multiple choice item to test simple past tense, and you can see that we are back to square one. Lessons learned. The initial item was unusable, but I was able to get a better result by further prompting. However, ChatGPT was only able to produce that one item, and it didn't remember our conversation. To get a better result, I should have probably repeated the whole set of instructions, not relying on ChatGPT to remember our conversation. Also, we know that ChatGPT is based on GPT 3.5, and they say that GPT-4 is better at remembering conversations, and it also learns faster. So shall we try Bing Chat then, which is based on GPT-4? I use the same instructions to produce items using Bing Chat. You can see that in the first attempt, both platforms produce the undesired item format. Although again, it might be me for not being specific enough about what format I wanted. But you can also see that there are some differences between ChatGPT and Bing Chat. Bing Chat produced a 3-option multiple choice question, and ChatGPT produced 4 options for some reason. Bing Chat also has an introduction. Here is an example of a multiple choice item at A1 CFR level to test present continuous tense in English. It also has a kind of a conclusion where it states the item construct. This question tests whether you can identify the correct sentence that uses the present continuous tense, and it also gives the correct answer. So let's try again with Bing Chat to see whether I can get the format that I want. You can see that Bing Chat version already has enough context in it because it is I watch TV now, so it has now enough context to choose the correct answer. Now let's see if it can remember our conversation to produce a new item. I asked it the same question. You can see the resulted item. So it seems that it could remember our conversation better. The new item that targets past simple uses the format that I want. But looking at the item, I'm not sure about distractor C. I eating sounds quite implausible, so the distractor is weak. One doesn't have to know how to use past tense to reject it. If I were to use this item in testing, I would definitely replace it. Well, let's now try with a vocabulary item, and I'll continue these attempts with ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT to write a multiple choice item at B1 CFR level to test the knowledge of vocabulary in English. You see that the resulting item is not at B1 level. I checked, and all words here, according to Oxford Vocabulary Checker, are at A1 level. Also, the key is very, very obvious. So let's try again. I told her that this item is very simple for B1 level, but I also realized that probably we need to choose the vocabulary to target in the item. ChatGPT doesn't do it well. So I asked it to create a multiple choice item to test the word technology. You can see the resulting item, and I'm not sure that there is a correct answer for this question. Is innovation synonymous to technology? And besides, again, that is not the format I'm looking for. I probably have to learn to query GPT better. Let's try again. This one is better in terms of the format. However, if you read this item, you see that all 4 options can probably be correct because different people are fascinated by different things. Anyway, let's now check if ChatGPT can produce a new item based on our conversation. And wow, it can. It remembered our conversation and produced an item of the right format. However, like with the previous items, there are at least 2 keys here. So the one lesson learned is that ChatGPT does not produce good destructors, and it probably need to invent a cleverer way to come up with destructors. Another lesson is that ChatGPT can be trained to produce items of the desirable format, but the context might be an issue. ChatGPT does not understand CFR levels, so we can't just tell it produce an item or produce a text at B1 level. Jumping ahead, it also doesn't understand readability levels. GPT, as we know, excels at producing texts. So let's move to reading. And to not show you my attempts only, here is a slide from the presentation that Professor Tineke Bronfort very recently made at the EALTA conference in Madrid. I reproduce it here with her permission. As you can see from Professor Bronfort's highlights, both item 1 and item 2 can be answered through lexical matching. In item 1, it's significant impact, and then in the first paragraph, we have technology has had a significant impact on the education sector. In item 2, we have it has provided access to educational resources from anywhere and anytime. And then in paragraph 2, we see access learning resources and educational materials from anywhere at any time. So it will be extremely easy for test takers to answer these questions just through matching the same words. Also, item 1 is very easy for B2 proficiency level. And item 2's destructors A, it has made learning less accessible, and D, it has made learning more difficult to access, mean the same thing. Also, the key is option B, is considerably longer than the 3 destructors, which makes it easy for test-wise students. In her talk, Professor Bronfort also noted that the text itself was quite good, interesting to read, very well structured, and suitable for B2 level. I would argue that the text was suitable for B2 level because the prompt contained the instruction to produce a text on an academic topic, not because the prompt asked for a B2 level text. As we've just seen, GPT does not understand CFR levels. It also doesn't understand readability measures, and I'm going to prove it in the next slide. I asked ChatGPT to produce a 100-word text about bees that would have the flash reading ease score of 60 to 70, so which is accessible to the 8th grade students. The resultant text had a flash reading ease score of 36.5, which is more suitable for college graduates. So what if instead telling ChatGPT the desired flash score, I tell ChatGPT who the text is for? Here is my other attempt. Write a 100-word text about bees. The text is for 8th form students. When I checked the readability, I found that it's still a bit more difficult than I asked for, but it's much closer to what I want than the original version it produced, because it's suitable for the 9th graders. Lesson learned. It seems that GPT understands the text audience, but not CFR or readability levels. In relation to this, I'd like to refer to the study done by Bezirhan and von Davier, who used GPT-3 to generate text for a primary school reading achievement test. They emphasize that prompt design is essential for GPT because it directly affects the quality and relevance of the output. They first used zero-shot learning, whereby only instructions were provided to GPT without a demonstration. They then used one-shot mode, where together with the instructions, one model was provided. And here is an example of the zero-shot instructions they used. We can see that they generate an informative story about bees for a 10-year-old. It includes sections about bees' body, their honey production, social life, and importance to ecosystem. The sections should be informative and engaging for a 10-year-old. We can see that they repeatedly tell GPT who the text is for 10-year-olds. They also specify the type of text, informative, and they specify the desired content, what the text should be about. To generate passages, Bezirhan and von Davier used Python to send API requests to the OpenAI's API service. As different from ChatGPT, where one just enters a query and hopes for the best, API enables users to fine-tune the output by defining various parameters. OpenAI's API has a so-called playground, you can see it on the screen now, which anyone can use for free after registering. It gives a user $18 worth of tokens to generate text. This is the playground's interface. On the right, you can see that there are parameters that can be defined. In particular, we can choose the type of text. Now it is set on complete. It can also be chat and other parameters. We can choose the GPT model that will complete the task. This one is Text DaVinci 003. Then there is the text temperature. Now it is set on 1, and it is supposed to produce balanced texts. If we lower the temperature, the text will become more conventional, more predictable. If we make the temperature higher than 1, the text will be more creative. Very high temperatures produce incoherent, meaningless texts. We can also modify the text length. And this is very useful because normally it's quite difficult to get GPT produce longer texts. And there are also other parameters which you can research yourselves. Coming back to Bezirhan and von Davier's study. They investigated the resultant text difficulty, and they found that the inclusion of grade and age information into the prompt reduced the text difficulty score. So it seems that the age and grade are the parameters that GPT can understand. Bezirhan and von Davier then gathered responses from 50 expert judges per passage to capture attitudes towards the passages. The judges did not know which texts were GPT generated. And the resultant statistics are very interesting. Two types of texts were generated, informative passages and fiction stories. For informative passages, human-produced texts scored higher on all parameters, such as how adequate they were, how engaging, how coherent, compared to GPT-generated ones. However, for the fiction stories, GPT-generated passages all scored higher. I spoke earlier about GPT's hallucinations and the fact that this is more geared towards producing creative text than factually correct text. Might this be the reason behind the findings? I don't know. I'm just asking this question. Coming back to my own experimentations with produce and test items. I've experimented asking ChatGPT to produce text accompanied with items. And I tried this on different item types, such as short answer questions, true-false items. The texts are always very reasonable. They are grammatical, they are coherent, they are topical. But I've noticed that the items always targeted understanding of detailed information within the text only. And the information could always be found in one sentence. You can see one example on the screen. So there is question 1, visual art is limited to only painting and drawing, and the answer can be found in that one sentence. Question 2, artists use visual art to express their ideas and emotions. Again, one sentence answer. And visual art cannot be understood or appreciated by people from different cultures. Again, we can find it in one line. When testing reading, we might want to target a range of constructs, a range of reading skills such as global understanding, skimming, inference, information synthesis. This was not achieved in the items that are generated. Can it be that GPT is better at producing items of particular types and at targeting particular constructs? Can we say, for example, that it writes good quality comprehension questions, targeting detailed understanding, but it is not good at writing multiple choice questions or at writing items that target global understanding? We need to know this to then use AI for where it works best. There is one large-scale testing body, Duolingo, who currently use GPT to generate all items for their Duolingo English test. And they very generously share their insights in talks and publications. So what types of items do they use? I just like to clarify that what I'm going to talk about now is solely based on presentations and publications that Duolingo team have given recently, and I'm not associated with Duolingo in any way. Duolingo flagship tasks are interactive reading and interactive listening. For the lack of time, I'll discuss the interactive reading task only. The interactive reading task is based on one short text to reduce testing time. The texts are produced using GPT-3, and now they moved on to GPT-4. And the interactive reading task uses 5 item types: vocabulary and context, text completion, comprehension questions, main idea, and title. Vocabulary and context task is based on the first part of the text passage, and it is a multiple choice one-word gap fill. After the text was produced, Duolingo team use a large language model to identify candidate words for deletion. Italian colleagues whose information I use to describe this task, they do not specify what language model they use, but I assume it is BERT. If there is anyone from Duolingo here in this webinar, please, and I am wrong, please correct me. The structures for the deleted words are then selected, also by the language model, and they use the model likelihood output. That is, how likely is each word to be correct in the gap. Italian colleagues write that ideally they choose the structures that have low but not too low likelihood and that have the same syntactic part of speech as the correct answer. Moving on to task 2, text completion. It consists of one item only, where test takers select a sentence to complete the passage with 4 options provided. So how do Duolingo team go about creating the destructor sentences? And they need 3 destructors. As they admitted themselves in the recent webinar, GPT is not good at generating destructors. These destructors are either too obvious or are potentially correct. And we've seen that as well a bit earlier. Therefore, Duolingo came up with a clever way of selecting destructors from alternative texts. You know that if you prompt GPT several times with the same instructions, every time it will generate a different or slightly different text. Candidates for destructors come from those alternative texts, and first they assemble a candidate pool, and then the sentences from the candidate pool are evaluated automatically to select the best destructor. This is done by calculating a range of NLP metrics, such as average similarity to the correct answer, to the source passage, and to individual sentences in the source passage. Task 3, comprehension questions, which are based on the passage. There are 2 comprehension questions. They are generated by GPT that was trained using similar tasks. It generates more questions than necessary, and the best questions are then selected automatically from the candidate pool with the help of a question answering model. As Italian colleagues have written, to better guarantee that the generated questions are answerable using the passage, we use an external question answering model to predict the overall likelihood that the question can be answered. And finally, the main idea and the title tasks. Both of them are 4-option multiple choice items. They are generated by GPT together with the text passages. These 3 destructors are then generated in the same way as for the text completion task from alternative texts, and they're evaluated automatically to select the best destructors. As Italian colleagues wrote, this is done based on their similarity to the passage and average negative log likelihood as estimated by the language model. Wow, this all sounds very impressive, and I take my hat off to Duolingo for being the pioneers in this field. However, after our initial fascination with this magical technology subsides, I think we need to start asking questions. And my first question is, how efficiently can we generate items using AI? Attali and colleagues have reported on a large-scale pilot of the interactive reading task. As the initial step, they generated 14,000 texts, including the topic and the title, using GPT-3 with 3-5 examples provided to the language model as training. Those passages were first evaluated automatically, after which 94.4% of passages were filtered out as unsuitable. The remaining set of 789 passages went for human content and fairness review. The review filtered out 42% of those passages. So in the end, 3.2% of the originally generated passages were used for piloting. This demonstrates that very little of the content GPT generates will be deemed suitable for testing. This is not such a big problem though, because GPT, unlike human writers, can generate huge numbers of passages in a very short time. And we also don't have to pay it like we pay human item writers. We also hope that newer versions of GPT will do a better job, so fewer passages will be rejected during review. My second question, how good is the quality of the items generated with GPT? From the above statistics, we can see that only a small percentage of items was deemed suitable for testing. So the majority of the items were not that good. But what I'm interested in, though, is whether the remaining 3.2%, as was in that study, are good enough to be used for testing. In other words, can GPT generate tasks that require no or very little editing, or do they still have to be edited by humans? Let's take destructors for the vocabulary and context multiple choice gap fill task, which are generated using likelihood statistics calculated by the model. Does this approach result in strong and plausible destructors that conform to the fundamental rules of producing multiple choice items? Or does the model come up with weak and obvious destructors that will be rejected by test takers easily? We definitely shouldn't take anything for granted here, but we need to research this further. And I hope that such research is happening as we speak. My third question, how much human review is needed? When using GPT to generate items, Italian colleagues reported for their interactive reading task piloting project that the review process is estimated to have taken about 15 minutes per passage, including questions, across all rounds of review. Is it enough? The answer depends on our answer to question 2. If GPT is able to produce tasks that require no editing, then the reviewers will just go through the rubble to find those rare tasks that are good enough and require no editing, and to reject the rest, even if such tasks are 1 in 1,000. However, if all tasks require editing, we might need to allow more time for review. So this also requires further investigation. Please don't take my questions as a sign that I oppose the use of AI in large-scale test item generation. AI is here to stay, and it would be very foolish to try and fight it. But I believe that we should adopt it in a judicious way. I hope that no large-scale testing body will rush into firing their item writers and produce items with AI just because it will save them money. However, I believe that every testing organization needs to start rethinking their item writing practices, and they need to do it now by asking themselves, what is possible to be done with AI? What is not possible, because AI is not good at producing items of the type that is required for the test. Can we replace this particular item type with a different one that better lends itself to automated generation? If we do so, will it affect the construct of testing? What will the quality of the resulting items be if we use AI? And how much editing do we need to build into the system? And we know that at least we need to do the fact-checking, we need to do the bias review, as I discussed earlier, and I suppose we need to build in some editing either. For classroom-based testing, I think that teachers who produce tests should not overlook AI capabilities. There are enough free platforms available even now. We have ChatGPT, we have VinChat, and I'm sure that there are more and better ones to come that will help teachers with writing test items. So what can be done for classroom assessment? We know that GPT can generate linguistically accurate, topical, and coherent texts. They can generate some, and I'd like to emphasize some items to go with the text. For example, comprehension questions targeting important detail, but we need to learn how to prompt it well to get better output. But we need to know how to ensure the correct text difficulty, and we need to check it. But the items need to be edited, and some items, for example, those that target inferencing, global understanding, synthesizing information, might have to be teacher written. Well, I've talked enough, and I'd like to end this presentation with a call to start a new special interest group within EALTA, AI in language testing. And I'm not only talking about AI for item writing here, because it has lots of applications in language testing besides item writing, like test delivery or scoring of responses. If you're a member of EALTA, if you want to learn more about using AI for language testing, if you think that AI in language testing SIG might be a good idea, and especially if you're interested in taking an active part in setting up and running such a SIG, please contact me via email. It's here, olena.rossi@itemwriting.com, and I hope we'll get together to set up and to run this SIG. Here are my references. And thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I hope I didn't run too much over the time limit, Richard.
No, that was absolutely perfect, Olena. Very, very interesting indeed. Thank you. We have had a few questions have come in as well, so I'll just run through maybe a few of those. One question from Ahmad says, have we had any studies being done on the percentage of texts and questions which are generated by humans, and how many of those are usable? So is there any way we can do any comparison?
This is very, very good question. And as an item writer and item reviewer, I can tell you that humans can also produce awful text and items. And a lot of them are rejected. But I believe, and I am not sure of any studies, although of any published studies, although I think every large-scale language testing organization would have such statistics internally for themselves, but I don't think that they will reveal the statistics to public of what is the percentage of items that are past the quality review finally. But I can tell you confidently that it's higher than 3.2%.
Okay. We've had another question from Mark says, has there been any similar question, but this time in terms of have any items being used with test takers? So has there been any research into how AI generated items have performed empirically versus human generated items? Do we have anything of that?
I'm not aware of this. This is all very, very new. A lot of studies that I referred to in this presentation, they are preprints. And that is why during the presentation, I called multiple times for more research to be done into this. So when I invite absolutely everyone here to start doing this research within your own context.
Okay. Another one from Nicholas says, are there types of item focus which you think that AI is better or worse at? I think you touched upon this a little bit, but are there any further thoughts on that?
Well, I think that AI, because it excels at producing texts, I think it is better at producing items that are basically texts. For example, close tests based on short texts, like C tests. For example, gap fill. Then, but again, we take the test produced by AI and then we edit it. Definitely there should be human in the loop here. When AI has to produce items separate from the text, here the quality is variable, I would say. As I said, for example, comprehension questions, all of them were targeting detailed understanding of specific information in the text, and there hasn't been any that would target global understanding, for example. Yeah.
Okay. Darren asks, how much of an issue do you think authenticity of a text generated by AI is, and what possible washback this could have on the learners?
Yeah. Well, do you mean that the text sound authentic according to the genre that they were written in? Yeah. I think I quoted one study where they fed GPT-produced essays into an essay batch, and human markers were not able to identify them as such. So probably a lot of GPT-generated text looks authentic enough. But at the same time, I noticed that there can be style issues as well. I noticed that especially when producing longer texts, GPT tends to become repetitive, using the same lexis, the same structures. So then it starts sounding less authentic. But again, GPT-4 is reportedly better at producing longer text. I think there are some issues, and it depends on each individual output. Potentially, there are some issues.
Okay, we've had a couple of requests for you to go back to your reference slide, please, if you could.
Yes, sure. So there are 3 pages with references, and Richard, I'm sure you will be sharing the video, and also I'm willing to share the PDF of the slides. So if not, I will also place them on my website. You will be able to see them from there.
Okay, great. Yes, we'll put those up. The video and the PDF of the slides will go up on the EALTA website in a few days, hopefully. Just looking at some other questions. We've still got time for a few more. If anybody else has more questions or any comments you'd like to make. Again, Jamie Clayton asked a bit more about the CEFR. So you said it doesn't know the CEFR, but do you think ChatGPT shows any kind of awareness of CEFR levels or vocabulary levels?
Everything, I want to qualify, everything I'm talking about comes from my own experience. And in my personal experience, when I asked GPT to produce text and I worded the prompt as produce text at a particular CFR level, it did not do it correctly. I mean, the text or the words were not according to the CFR levels. And I also found, as I spoke, that it doesn't understand when I ask it to produce text according to specific readability measure. What I found, and what the study by Bezirhan and von Davier also found, they confirmed my idea that it better understands the age and the education level of the audience. So if you specify that the text is for children, that specify the texts for children of particular age, 5 years old, 10, 15, whatever. It is for ninth graders, it is for college educated people, then I think it will produce better results, in my personal experience.
Okay. Lots more questions coming in. Xing asks, how do you foresee the role of humans in item writing changing in the future?
Well, I don't think that all item writers will be fired, no. Just as the CEO of OpenAI said very recently that I think it was during the Senate hearing that it does not, because a lot of people are afraid now that AI will eliminate a lot of jobs. He said that AI can do tasks, not jobs. So I think the same will happen with item writing. For example, GPT can take over the tasks of producing texts, but then they will have to go to human item writers who will do the editing. But probably because this large time-consuming task will be taken over by GPT, we might need fewer item writers. Any particular organization might need fewer item writers, and these item writers will become more item editors or item reviewers. But again, we see that the testing field is expanding, and there will be more organizations that require item editors. So I'm still sure that everyone who is doing this work now will still keep it. And another thing that I read about is that, as always, technology eliminates some jobs, but it creates new jobs. And now I was surprised to find that there is now a specific job which and the people who do this job, the only thing they do is they write good GPT prompts. And as I said in the presentation, it's very important to prompt GPT correctly. So different jobs will appear. Maybe there will be an item writer GPT prompter in the future.
Okay, we've had a couple of other questions as well related to that, saying, what do we think about the validity and the reliability of these auto-generated items, and what do we need to do to make sure that they are fair, valid, and reliable? So what procedures do we need to put in place, do you think?
In terms of fairness, we need to have the fairness and bias review, definitely, and I talked about it, because GPT is biased, but it's biased because of us. It's biased because of the training data. Human-generated training data contains biases, so GPT is consequently biased. In terms of ensuring the item validity, I think, again, in the presentation, I talked about the when I spoke about reading tasks, about the targeting of different reading skills. We need to ensure that we target the constructs that we want to target, and not only that we produce items that are easy to produce using GPT. And this is the catch here, which I think every responsible language testing organization should avoid. We need to stick to ensuring that our items are valid, instead of ensuring that they're cheap to produce using GPT and not using human item writers.
Okay, yeah, we've had quite a few comments actually about the equality, diversity, inclusion aspects to things, and that side of fairness, wondering whether, because of those concerns, ChatGPT is usable or not, or is appropriate for us to use. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that, about the different biases that can be within the items or within the passages.
I think the research is going on now. I mentioned research about the ChatGPT 3 biases, racial, religious biases, gender biases. There will be more research. So these are, once all the bias types are identified, if it's possible, then I'm sure we need to produce review checklists or whatever that we will then use during the review process of all the texts produced by GPT.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We've had lots of comments, which I'm kind of skimming through in the chat as well. There's lots of very interesting people posting links. Thanks, Eric, for the link to the BBC there, and I'm sure we've all got lots of other information that we can look at as well. Maybe one question, actually, it was kind of a question that you asked, Olena, maybe from me, is what do you think about how working with ChatGPT is going to affect our constructs? Do you think we have any idea where that may lead us? Is it going to change the constructs that we're going to be assessing?
Well, I think thank you, Richard. It's a very deep question, and we can approach it from many sides. So, as I said, if testing, if using AI compromises the important constructs that have to be tested, then it is a big problem. But I think there are many different solutions to it. One is to stick to human-produced items. Another is innovate. Maybe again, with the use of technology, we can come up with the items, maybe different ones, maybe not true false, maybe not comprehension questions, but multimodal, whatever, that they do target the right constructs, but in an innovative way, and they can be produced with AI. We don't know, again, research is needed. This is the usual thing to say. Well, what else I wanted to say? Yeah, I had another thought, but I think I just forgot it. I have too many thoughts about it, sorry.
Okay, it is a very, very big question, and one that we're going to be looking at for a long time.
Sorry, yes, I remembered what I wanted to say. But our life is developing together with the development of technology, and probably new important constructs, new important target language use domains appear that we need to be testing in items, and that we are not testing now, which are more prone to item generation. For example, the same communication with chatbots. Now it has become an important part of everyone's life, because whatever service we access, we communicate with a chatbot. Maybe this can be tested using AI technology. So we need to introduce new constructs guided by how our life changes very rapidly. And we need to introduce new item types.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Olena. That's all we have time for, I think, now. So that was a really interesting talk on a very topical subject. It's generated a lot of interest. So thank you once again.
And so, Richard, I just want to remind those interested in AI to get in touch with me if you would like to set up a SIG, EALTA SIG in AI for language testing.
Okay, so if you have any feedback about today's session, you can please send an email to me. And this webinar and the slides should be up on the EALTA website sometime soon. There'll be another webinar sometime probably late summer or autumn. And I think we'll sign off for now. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks once again to Olena for a great and very thought-provoking talk. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.